Chapter 3. The snow had stopped, but the wind was even more bitter. Mistletoe and willows, so lovely in spring, looked threatening and black. Alex tried not to think of soup. He tried not to think of the warmth of it as it hits the face when one leans over the bowl, of the great hot slices of potato, carrots, beans, cabbage, and rich chunks of meat that first encounter the taste buds, become masticated by sharp teeth, and pass down the throat into the stomach, warming the throat, the gullet, and the belly. He began counting steps. 200, 310, 250. But always the vision of soup came back, floating like a phantom just in front of him, out of reach. Now it was joined by a vision of bread, thick, crusty, laden with soft yellow butter. He recited his multiplication tables, concentrating very hard on the 11s and 12s, always difficult, and now, in his weakened state, nearly impossible. But the soup appeared and the bread, and now cake and fruit as well. Apples and summer fruits, plums and melons. A samovar of hot boiling water appeared and fragrant pots of black tea. The images were strong. He gave up trying to divert himself and tried to imagine their taste. Saliva flowed in his dry mouth, and his stomach contracted with pain as he swallowed. His head felt strangely large and tight, and yet empty and weightless. His body was chilled, but it did not pain him because his attention was focused only on his feet, the deep and terrible cold of them, as he tramped through the packed snow, and the fact that they must be kept moving, left foot, right foot, until they brought him to the city. Now he, like others, became wrapped only in his own misery, and for the most part remained aloof from the other travelers. But along the sides of the road he could not avoid the sight of bodies of other children and adults who had not been able to keep their feet moving. At first he had stopped and prodded them, saying, as the woman had said to him, "Come on, get up, you'll freeze that way." But the first child had only moaned, and Alex had been unable to move him. The second did not moan at all. One had used his remaining strength to say, "Go away, go away." After that, Alex tried not to see the bodies along the side of the road. Snow drifting over them helped blur their reality. Did he sleep as he walked? He seemed sometimes to return from the road from some place that had been in his mind, or no place. Now he returned to his body on the road and found that there were dilapidated buildings beside the road, becoming more dense as he progressed. People beside him were saying, "Moscow, this is Moscow." Alex looked up, and in the distance he could see the sun shining on the many-colored domes, blue, green, gold, a dream of heaven. Yes, it must be a dream, because around him here on the road, the same sun seemed cold as the wind blew in great gusts. He drew his wet collar up and put his head down, withdrawing like a tortoise. No, he thought, this can't be Moscow. Besides, all that really mattered now was the cold. He used to think, when he went into the winter woods with old Tolka, that was as cold as it could possibly be. But Tolka was always able to make a fire out of nothing. Out of snow, it seemed, if need be. Soon the tattered buildings beside the road clustered closer and taller. Shops and houses with windows barred and broken, mended with rags, tin, and paper, doors hanging on hinges, and in a while the road on which he was walking intersected crossroads and then ran into a square with a small market and a few stalls. A woman in peasant clothes held a heavy tray of straps on her neck and was selling threads of many color. At a nearby stall there was an apple vendor with half a dozen apples, brown and dented, but Alex would have devoured them all if he could. He approached the vendor, reaching into the depths of his innermost pocket with his frozen hands to bring forth his tiny store of kopecks. "Please," he said. The vendor surveyed the coins in Alex's hand. "Not enough," he said. "But I have not eaten in 3 days," Alex said. "Can I give apples away to everyone who has not eaten in 3 days?" "No," said the vendor, who turned away. Alex turned to the woman of spools of thread. "Can you tell me the way to Vishaya Street?" She drew her threads closer and protected them. "I know the way here from my bed," she said. "Ask a soldier." And she pointed to one of a number of uniformed men who walked casually around the square. Since the Civil War, Alex had had a deep fear of soldiers, men who could shoot each other, who came in the night and carried off friends. So he lingered around the edges of the square in the shadow of a building, not able to master his courage to approach one. And then suddenly he felt a hand on his shoulder. He wheeled and found himself looking up into the face of just such a uniformed man. "What are you doing here, eh? Waiting for your chance to rob one of those poor comrade vendors, I'm sure. Well, there'll be slim pickings today. From whom did you steal that good coat?" he asked, pulling at the collar. "And the hat? Well, you'd better come with me now to the Children's Detention Center. No, no, Alex cried. I'm not a thief. The young soldier laughed. Do you think I expect you to say who you are? His voice hardened. Come on, let's not waste time. You're not the only waif I have to cart over here today. Though I don't know why. There's hardly room for another rat, let alone more Brez Prisoni, wild children. But listen, I have just come all the way from Kovrov. I've traveled for many days. I'm trying to find my uncle near Tvashaya Street. Ask these people, he pointed to the vendors. I have been trying to buy an apple, but I haven't enough money. I've asked this old woman the way to Tvashaya Street. The soldier let go of his collar. Is that the truth, Dan? Well, I'll let you go this time. Tvashaya Street is not far from the Kremlin. Look over that way and you will see many towers. Go across the next street to the right all the way to the end. Then turn left up the hill, across the big square, and there you are. Go on now. Don't let me see you back here, or I will know that you are lying. And you know what we do with liars. Kremlin is the former palace of the Grand Duke and the Tsars, the kings of Russia, and it is now the center of the Soviet government. Alex tried not to think. He turned and ran. He did not know how he mustered the strength to do it. He had felt only a moment ago that he could hardly walk another step. He stumbled across the square, and, following the soldier's directions, down the next street to the end, turned left, labored up the hill and to the outskirts of Red Square with the high wall of the Kremlin beyond. The great arches were destroyed and lay in piles of rubble. A scaffolding was erected around the spires of St. Basil's Cathedral. The enormous square seemed almost empty except for a few people on foot and a couple of carts and wooden wheels being drawn, not by horses, but by peasants. Now he turned as directed and soon found himself into Versailles Street. He was flooded with new hope, life. The fear, horror, misery of the last few days faded in the expectation of seeing his uncle, embracing him, being welcomed into his home. Yes, there was the restaurant where they had had the hot chocolate and rum cakes in another lifetime, boarded up now. But this was the little street where his uncle's house stood. Yes, there it was. He knew he would recognize the house because of the rosette chiseled in the stone over the front door. Suddenly exhausted, he sat for a moment of the stone steps before mounting them. Then, with a resurgence of a kind of tidiness his mother had insisted upon, he reached into the snow and took a scoop in his hand and washed his face, then his hands. He found cleaner snow underneath and took it in his mouth, then spat it out. He took off his wet cap and smoothed his hair. He tried to brush his soiled coat. Then he rose and climbed the steps, his heart beating fast. He pulled the bell. At first there was no answer, so he pulled it again. Finally the door was opened by an old woman, her hair flying out from underneath a babushka, which is a scarf wrapped around her head. Her body swathed in heavy skirts and shawls, she stood shivering in the doorway. Hurry up, what is it? We don't want to freeze any more than we are. Good morning, madame. My uncle, Dmitri Antonovich Propopov. I am here to see him. I don't know a Dmitri Antonovich, the woman said, trying to close the door. But Alex was standing in the opening. I beg your pardon, but he's always lived here. This is his house. He's a journalist. Surely you must know that. The only thing I know is that you're making me keep the door open, and it's chilling the house that's already so cold we can't breathe. This house belongs to no citizen. It belongs to the people. 6 families live here now, and none of them is named Portropov. Perhaps it was his house, but it isn't now. Then where can I look for him? Where has he gone? I have come all the way from Kovrov to see him, and he's my only relative within 1,000 miles of here. Alex's voice rose in fear and anxiety. He was grasping the woman's arm. She softened her look a bit and cast a nervous glance over her shoulder. Then she raised her voice. That's too bad for you, but it's not news. The city's full of children like you, hordes of them. She lowered her voice to a whisper then. Your uncle was taken away a month ago. You could go to the local Soviet and inquire, but I don't think it would be wise. Then she raised her voice again. I'm sorry, I can't help you. And she gave Alex a little push, and he was back on the outside of the closed door. He wandered down the steps and slowly back to the corner of the square. The light snow was falling, covering the old drifts with fresh white. It did not look colder than Alex felt. The pain of hunger and cold was now mixed with this new, intolerable knowledge. He was alone. The weakness he had felt made him wish to rest for a long time anywhere. In the snow if he must. He leaned against a building and, through half-closed lids, regarded the square. He had found long ago that squinting made things less real, and he did it now without thinking. Like the first square, this square had a small market in progress, with peddlers with trays around their necks wandered about, approaching pedestrians. There were several covered barrows of motley assorted of moldy-looking potatoes, cabbages, turnips, and apples. There was a stand of sausages too, but Alex now felt ill when he thought of them. Around the square stood many shops, but their shattered windows were barred or plugged with rags, their doors boarded up. A city exhausted after a long siege. Soldiers with rifles patrolled the street, and even through his half closed eyelids, Alex could read signs and banners that hung upon the building. We're building a society. Religion is opium for the people. We must make sacrifices. We are surrounded by enemies. A large picture of Lenin was hung on the building directly across from him. Suddenly, like a flight of birds, a pack of children swooped from an alley behind him. Without pause, they descended on the vegetable stall and, in what seemed a single motion, nearly cleared it all of its few bits of produce. Then they flew past and were out of sight. The old vendor cried out like a fox shot in one leg, high-pitched, keening. His stall was nearly bare now, as if there had never been any produce at all. Other people standing around shook their heads and shrugged their shoulders. Had they seen the thieves, or was it a ghostly horde conjured by the sun on the snow? They went back to their business of hawking their small stocks and continued their progress through the square. Now, from the same alley, there crept a very small figure of a boy, ragged, filthy, his clothes flapping about him, his feet bound in rags. Then, suddenly, like the others, he broke into the run, past the vegetable stand, grabbed a remaining cabbage, and, as the owner of the stand renewed his scream, ran behind another stand, ducked out of sight under a barrel. But Alex could see his bound feet sticking out, looking dirty, like dirty snow or trash. Where did he go? The thief, shouted the peddler. He appealed to Alex. You were standing right there. Where did he go? Which way? A soldier patrolling the square spoke sharply to him. You boy, Did you see where the filthy rascal went? He said it angrily, but it was as if he had said the same thing many times before, performing his hopeless duty. Behind the soldier, Alex could see the foot withdraw under the stall, and the boy move swiftly down the alley. That way, Alex croaked, his voice frozen to his throat. He went that way, and pointed across the square in the opposite direction. The soldier took off, but without much vigor, and the peddler muttered, He's wasting his time. He knows it. We know it. They are like fish in a net full of holes. The question is not, will he catch him? The question is, who is to starve first, we or they? And he pushed his few turnips and beetroots closer together and brooded over them like a mother hen. You'd better be careful not to make too much of a fuss, another peddler advised the old man. They may take their revenge on you. Now, near the place where the child had been hiding, Alex saw a tall, dark boy appear. He stared at Alex, then signaled him. Alex hesitated and then moved towards him, the wind blowing through his clothing, his nose brittle in the cold, his body chilled and shaking inside his damp coat. And yet this boy he now faced wore only a ragged jacket, torn cotton trousers, and an ordinary workman's cap, pulled low over his rugged, wide face. Rag-wrapped feet protruded from the holes in outside boots, the leather in shreds. "Why didn't you rat on the boy?" he challenged. Alex drew back and shook his head. "I don't know. He was so small and so hungry," the tall boy said almost angrily. "Well, everyone's hungry. Oh, perhaps not you," he added almost sarcastically. "You with your heavy coat and strong boots and warm cap. Perhaps you have a good home and warm fire and food." "No," Alex said, and his weariness made him close to tears when he thought of the luxuries the boy had listed. "I used to have. Now I have no home and no fire. I have not eaten in 3 days." He felt weak and grabbed the nearest barrel for support. "Hands away!" shouted the peddler. "Then, fool, why don't you sell your coat before it's stolen?" the boy asked. "Before I steal it, in fact." And then he laughed a hearty laugh. "Are you with a band?" he asked. "Band?" Alex asked dully. "I don't know what you mean. I've just arrived in Moscow. I've come to find my uncle, but right now I don't know what to do." "Everyone knows what to do. Look for food and shelter." "What else would you do?" the boy said. "But where?" Alex said. "You really are green, aren't you?" the boy said. He looked Alex over carefully. "Look me in the eyes," he commanded. "Open your mouth. Do you spit blood when you cough?" Alex shook his head. "If you're lying, we'll beat you up, you know." All right, if you're hungry, you can come with me. What do they call you? I'm Peter. Alex, he answered. The boy's rough appearance and manner frightened him, but the invitation to food was too much to resist. And there was something about the boy, through the dirt, through that hard look, that impressed him. He had an authority that almost like a father's. And with this thought of family, Alex felt the pain sharply again. Where are they? Will we ever see each other again? Peter turned without another word and started through the alley, turned left into another alley out onto the streets of boarded up buildings, plastered with signs, these shouting curses at England, France, and Italy. They climbed over piles of snow covered rubble, and finally, after looking cautiously about, Alex followed Peter down some stone steps into the cellar of a building that looked as if it could not stand another day. Boarded up, broken. Surely no one could live here. Down the dark steps they went, along a black corridor to the back, and then, as Peter removed some boards from a wall, into a world such as Alex had never seen, never dreamed that existed. Chapter 4. A large cellar with a dirt floor was the place in which he found himself when he could see at all. The rooms were filled with a dense, oily smoke, lit eerily from the back as if by matches behind a filmy curtain. These lights proved to be several small, smoky fires made of refuse, paper, and rags. When Alex's eyes suggested, he could see that there were many children grouped around each fire, talking, laughing, joking, quarreling, singing, smoking, playing cards. In one corner, a loud fight was going on, and from the sounds issuing from it, someone was being hurt. Alex could not guess how many occupants there were, because in the dim light and smoke, he could not see the whole area, but everywhere he looked, another ragged figure appeared, even in the walls in which there were small hollows like shelves. Some called a greeting to Peter when they saw him, and he squatted by one of the fires, reaching his hands out to the feeble heat and rubbing them on his face. He took off his wet and torn boots and put his rag-wrapped feet close to the fire and then motioned Alex to sit. This one's named Alex, he said. Give him a piece of bread and some hot water, he directed one of the boys. The boy spat. Why him? He protested. You said no bread until supper. This will be his supper portion, Peter said sternly, giving the boy a hard look. He hasn't eaten for 3 days. The complaining one grunted and shuffled over to a corner where a bag of rags hung from a beam. In a moment he was back and threw Alex a piece of stale bread. Alex ate it eagerly, nodding his thanks. Then he drank the hot water from a wooden bowl, and he thought he had never experienced such comfort as that, as it warmed his throat and stomach. That one is Boris, Peter said. He's in charge of the food today. And this is Kostya, he said, pointing to a sharp-faced boy. Sometimes we call him the dancer because he walks and dances in his sleep. That clown is Ivan. He pointed to the boy with a round pudding face and no nose to speak of. The boy acknowledged the introductions by crossing his eyes and saluting at the arm of a very pale boy who sat in front of him. The albino is Leon, and this is Miska, he said. To the small boy Alex had seen in the square came and stood across the fire from the others. Peter stood up and walked over to him. He took him by the ear. What did you think you were doing in the market, you numbskull? He shook the little boy, and the boy cried out pitifully. Peter, don't! I just wanted to earn my share like the others. You can earn your share by staying here and keeping a fire lit. You can earn your share with the rest of the little ones by begging or juggling. What do you think would happen if you were caught, eh? We'd all be caught, and you'd been told that 100 times. Would you like to see them take you to the children's home on Pokrovskaya Street? Or perhaps you prefer the one on Kamnovik Quarter? That one is even worse than the one we were in the south. When you are big enough to learn to steal, I'll show you how, and you'll be the best thief in Moscow. But not now. Peter shook him again. Do you understand? Say you understand. I understand. Say it again. He shook the boy once more. I understand. To make sure you understand, there will be no bread for you tonight. You have contributed your share to Alex for saving you from the soldier. He dropped little Miska on the floor. But Peter, Miska whimpered, I brought a cabbage. Good. No cabbage either. Cabbage? Yes, Alex could distinguish through the many heavy, rancid, nauseating odors of the cellar the unmistakable smell of that beloved vegetable cooking. And it was in a large pot on the largest of the fires. Exhaustion swept over him now. He took off his boots and tried to warm his toes, and as the terrible sharp edge of the cold subsided, sleep came and slumped him forward. He was awakened by a shove on his shoulder. It was a small boy, Miska, holding a wooden bowl of steaming, watery cabbage brew. Peter said to give you this. His face was mournful, but you had your share of bread. Alex took it, nodding a thank you to the boy, who continued to stand there gnawing his filthy fingers, watching seriously as Alex drank from the bowl. It tasted terrible, and Alex gagged, nearly vomited. But it was hot and it was nourishing, and the days of walking with hunger and cold had made a difference. He thought of the time, could it be only a few days ago, when he might have pushed his oatmeal away if it had tasted a bit scorched. Something that happened often when his old grandmother fixed the breakfast. She was forgetful, his mother said. I've got some of the cabbage, Miska said as he watched Alex down the hot broth. Yes, I know, Alex replied. It's very good. And then he remembered that this frail child was to have none. Here, have what is left of mine, he offered. He raised the bowl, and suddenly a strong arm struck the bowl and its contents across the floor. If I say he gets no soup, he gets no soup, said Peter angrily. If you're staying here, you must know that what I say is the law. But I'm not staying here, Alex cried, alarmed at the idea. You're not what, you soukskin, you son of a bitch? Peter challenged, coming close. You're not hungry? You're not cold? You're not alone with no place to stay? Do you think you're better than us because you have a coat? We could have coats too, Kostya said, his thin body looking as if the weight of a coat would collapse it. He was putting a spoon into the band of his cap, having just finished his soup. If we get a coat, we could sell it. You'd rather be cold? Alex asked, curiosity outweighing fear. These boys, who seemed merely filthy and imprudent, now seemed more sinister and threatening, their voices hostile. In the light of the fire, their gnome-like faces and shaggy, matted hair made them seem like characters in nightmares or illustrations of evil spirits, seen as they were in the strange, oily light. I would rather, Kostya said, be warm with a full stomach, and we don't get everything we want. Not everything, said Ivan, the clown, fashioning another set of cross-eyed look. Of course, we have most luxuries, and he lounged back against one of the other boys, who let him fall to the ground. We can keep each other warm better than overcoats do, Kostya said. Overcoats get wet, but we don't eat each other. Not yet, anyways. He gave a hard laugh, and the children who heard him tittered without much mirth. Well, I'll be going in the morning, Alex said. Suit yourself, Peter replied. Nobody has to stay with us. In fact, it is not easy to belong to our band. We have rules. What rules? Alex asked. You don't need to know them, since you're not staying with us, Peter said. But it is just as serious as the Commissal in many ways. But you don't have to jump on command, Leon said, nor go on parade for someone who stole your parents' farm. Nor betray your parents, Kostya added, if you have any. The Besperazoni are like animals of nature, Peter said. Perhaps they are cold as dogs in the snow and as hungry as wolves in the forest, but they are free. Kostya now went to the fire, and reaching in for a dead coal, he bent over and started to use it to blacken his skin, which was exposed by a rag in his trouser leg. Do me too, Kostya, Miska said, and leaned over while Kostya blackened a spot in the seat of his pants. Some of the smaller children lined up behind Miska to be groomed with coal. Sitting by the fire, Alex watched them jumping and playing as if it were a game at school. In a corner nearby, Boris, the custodian of food, and another boy, who Alex remembered had been introduced as Grigory, were quietly sitting a fire between the toes of the sleeping boy. Alex wanted to cry out, but the boy wakened in a moment, yowled, and thrashed out at the fire. Then he came over and punched Boris and Grigory, and now a small fight was going on. Throughout the cellar there was some singing. No song was clear, but several songs went on at once, along with much coughing and some shouting. It was clamorous. Now Miska came and crouched near the fire. He took a tattered red-covered book from under his shirt and turned the pages, studying the finely etched pictures. What are you reading? Alex asked. I don't know, Miska said. I can't read. Peter found it in a real house and gave it to me. I gave Boris and Grigory the thin paper over the pictures for cigarettes. Does Peter read it to you then? Oh, Peter can't read much either. He was brought up in a children's home, and they do not teach you to read there. Alex could not believe that. Peter must be 14 or 15. Here, he said, let me see it. I'll read you a bit. Oh, everyone knows this story. My grandmother used to read it to me long ago. And he began to read about the Leshy, a spirit with great bulbous eyes, long hair, and blue-tinged skin. The spirit was the protector of rascals and thieves. He was a carefree spirit, and it is his sound we hear in the mountain in our echo. If you wander in the woods, he is likely to show you the wrong way home, and you will be lost unless you take off your coat and wear it on the wrong side round. As Alex read the old tale, he remembered how it was to be curled up against his grandmother, the sweet smell of lavender on her clothes. Before long, his eyes felt heavy in the dim light, and he looked up from the book. Miska had fallen asleep, his head against Alex's shoulder, and around him were several other rapt listeners, regarding him with awe. From the other side of the fire, Peter was looking at him thoughtfully. Then, without saying anything, he rolled over and went to sleep. The room was quieting. There were whispers from this corner, wisps of smoke from that one, a hard laugh here, and intermittent coughing everywhere. But finally, Alex slept too. He awoke during the night and found Miska was curled against him, and so was another boy on the other side. He settled back again with these ragged, live blankets around him. In the dim light, he could see that all the boys were in piles like bundles of trash, and that he had become part of the huddle, a rag bag of humanity, giving each other the only thing they had, the little warmth of their bodies.